To prepare for a week-long experience of living without smartphones, a group of college students, led by their instructor, ventures deep into a dense forest to camp and adapt to a more primitive lifestyle. As night falls, the absence of their phones leaves them bored, and they quickly retreat to their tents to sleep. Daniel, a habitual night owl, finds it impossible to adapt and sneaks out to the lakeside to enjoy the scenery. Suddenly, Aniela joins him, startling him. She too couldn't sleep and wanted some fresh air. The two hit it off and spend the night talking, during which Daniel falls for her. After a tender night together, Aniela returns to her tent to rest. Daniel, meanwhile, gets dressed, wraps himself in his sleeping bag, and pulls out a hidden phone. Immersed in his phone, Daniel failed to notice someone approaching from behind, until it was too late. The butcher grabbed the sleeping bag and dragged it to the side of a tree. When morning came, the instructor realized Daniel was missing. She asked everyone where they had last seen him. Aniela responded that they had chatted by the lake the night before. When they went to check the area, the instructor found only half a cigarette. Meanwhile, Zosia seemed to have noticed something. She slowly approached a tree and discovered a large amount of blood on it. Panicking, she called everyone over. At first, they thought it was sap from the tree, but after smelling it, they confirmed it was blood. The instructor realized the gravity of the situation. As their leader, she felt responsible for each of the students. She proposed splitting up to search for Daniel and reconvening at the same spot in an hour. If they still couldn't find him, they would return to base and call the police. Aniela and Bartek stayed behind. As Julik walked, he sarcastically remarked that they had already committed one of the 4 cardinal sins of horror movies: curiosity, ignoring the supernatural. If you're ugly, you're doomed. Splitting up. However, Zosia and the instructor, who weren't fans of horror movies, didn't understand what he was talking about. Before they could walk much further, they stumbled upon a cabin ahead. Seeking help, the instructor led them inside, but the room was empty and eerily quiet. Just then, noises emerged from beneath the floor. Opening a foul stench wafted up. Determined to see if Daniel was trapped there, the instructor and Zosia descended into the basement, leaving Julik above to keep watch. Upon entering, they encountered a horrifying sight. Daniel's lifeless body lay there. Suddenly, more noises came from outside. It was the butcher returning. The group hurried back into the basement, and the butcher opened a valve, slowly descending toward them. The instructor forced open a window and helped Zosia escape. As she pushed Julik out next, the butcher noticed them. Just as the instructor was preparing to escape herself, Daniel's phone began ringing. The instructor underestimated the butcher's strength. After a series of harrowing screams, her severed head was thrown out of the... Realizing the danger, the survivors fled into the forest. Meanwhile, Aniela and Bartek were chatting by the lake, blissfully unaware of the chaos unfolding. As Bartek spoke, he turned to find Aniela impaled by a steel rod. Terrified, Bartek ran into the forest. Not far ahead, he came upon a church. Desperate for help, he begged the priest for assistance and asked to use the phone. The priest explained that recent storms had disrupted the phone lines, but reassured Bartek that the church was safe. Just then, the phone suddenly rang. Bartek looked at the priest in confusion. When Bartek woke up, he found himself tied up. The priest was gazing at him with a disturbingly affectionate look. The priest seemed to have taken a liking to him. Strange sounds outside drew the priest away, leaving Bartek with instructions to stay put until his return. Once the priest was gone, Bartek began working to free himself. Upon escaping, he checked the area and noticed an engine running, but saw no one nearby. When he turned back around, the butcher was standing right in front of him. Having freed himself, Bartek rushed to a window and climbed onto a stool to peek outside, witnessing the horrifying events unfold. Realizing escape was impossible, he hid inside a nearby cabinet. The butcher entered the room. Bartek held his breath, but he was eventually discovered. Elsewhere, Zosia and Julik continued walking and came upon another cabin. Taking a risk, They knocked on the door and found an old man living there. Zosia shared everything they had been through. The old man, in turn, told them a story. Years ago, a family lived in the area, a mother and her twin sons. They were a happy family until disaster struck one day. A loud explosion rocked the sky, and a meteor flew through the air, crashing nearby. Driven by curiosity, the twins secretly brought the meteor home and hid it under their bed. The meteor began to mutate, leaking a black liquid. Soon after, the twins also began to transform. By morning, the mother couldn't find her sons. Following a trail of blood, she discovered them in the basement, feasting on the family dog. Terrified, she locked the basement door and began feeding them pigs daily to prevent them from harming others. As the years passed and her strength waned, she accidentally locked herself in the basement. The twins devoured her alive. The old man offered the two students food, water, and even a gun, urging them to stay. But Zosia and Julik knew staying wasn't a solution. They needed Daniel's phone, believing it might be their only chance to escape. The two returned to the butcher's lair. Peeking through the window, Zosia saw the butcher eating. They began to formulate a plan to retrieve Daniel's phone. Julik would make a noise to draw the butcher's attention, allowing Zosia to sneak into the basement and grab the phone. With Zosia's encouragement, Julik mustered his courage and banged loudly on the front door. The butcher took the bait and moved toward the noise. Taking advantage of the distraction, Zosia slipped into the basement, found Daniel's body, and retrieved his phone. Unbeknownst to her, the butcher had returned. He lifted Zosia effortlessly, choking her. Just as she was about to lose consciousness, Julik intervened, stabbing the butcher. Unfortunately, the knife had little effect on the hulking figure. The butcher retaliated, stabbing Julik and grabbing him by the neck. Holding Julik still, the butcher leaned in and bit off his tongue. When Zosia regained consciousness, she found herself chained, with Julik lying nearby, barely alive. Seeing that Julik was already dying, there was nothing she could do to make him more comfortable.
Nie rozumiem, co mówisz. Nie rozumiem.
Skąd to? Dla mnie.
Desperate but determined, Zosia noticed a small knife within reach. Fueled by the flicker of hope, she used it to pick the lock on her chains. After freeing herself, she hesitated as she looked at Julik's lifeless body, but ultimately decided to act. In the basement, she found a machete. Quietly, she crept to the basement door and peered through the gap, spotting the butcher, asleep. Steeling herself, she crept upstairs and approached the butcher. With one swift motion, she eliminated him. Zosia fled into the forest, eventually spotting a patrolling police car. Waving it down, she climbed in, and the officer offered to take her back to town. As they drove, the car suddenly hit something. The officer stopped to investigate, instructing Zosia to stay in the car. Zosia, however, realized the danger. It might be another butcher. She frantically signaled to the officer to be cautious, but when she tried to leave the car, she found the doors locked. In a moment of panic, Zosia broke the car window and climbed into the driver's seat. The butcher appeared on the car's roof and swung an axe, shattering the sunroof. Zosia slammed on the gas, throwing him off the vehicle. Rather than fleeing, she put the car in reverse and drove over him, ensuring he was truly incapacitated. Only after confirming the butcher was no longer a threat did Zosia drive away, finally safe. The film ends here.